Tales of Herding Gods, Episode 4. The devil ape erupted with fury and started chasing after Qin Mu. However, after a few steps, it realized that its speed was inferior to Qin Mu's because of how large it was. Such a humiliation enraged the devil ape. It uprooted tree after tree, running its hand along the length of one, and getting rid of its branches before throwing it like an enormous spear. Die, young'un! The bare tree trunk flew through the air at an astonishing speed, clearly carrying an extraordinary amount of force. However, the ape's throw wasn't accurate, so the trunk crashed and landed several yards away from Qin Mu. The devil ape became even angrier and wanted to throw another tree spear, but Qin Mu had run off into the distance. It no longer had a target to vent its anger on, so all it could do was beat its chest repeatedly. Senior brother Q quietly called out to the other youths, "That devil brat's cultivation is definitely inferior to ours, and his injuries must be worse than mine. There's no way he'll be able to go far." Pushing himself to his feet, he grunted as intense pain racked his chest. He was afraid that many of his ribs had been broken by the devil ape's strike. However, he believed that if Qin Mu could withstand a blow from the devil ape, he could endure it as well. He just hadn't expected Qin Mu to be that strong. Qin Mu's cultivation definitely wasn't weak. His vital qi lacking attributes was the only reason he couldn't display his full potential. Despite his young age, if one were to compare their cultivation, Qin Mu certainly wasn't weaker than any of them, including senior brother Ku. Taking a detour around the devil ape's territory, the youths eventually found Qin Mu's trail again. Just as senior brother Q said, Qin Mu had been heavily injured by the devil ape as well, having no choice but to reduce his speed to the point that they could catch up. However, as they continued to chase Qin Mu, they discovered that Qin Mu's speed gradually increased as if his injuries were no longer an issue. This little devil must have some miraculous healing medicine. The hearts of all four youths sank. Senior brother Q had consumed medicine that their sect had given him, but it clearly wasn't as effective as Qin Mu's medicine. Seeing how quickly Qin Mu's speed had risen, they inferred that his injuries were definitely healing at a rate visible to the naked eye. This kind of medicine made their eyes and hearts burn with greed. The medicine in our sect is not of the highest quality. If we manage to catch that devil brat and seize the recipe of that miraculous medicine from him, our masters would definitely be pleased and reward us greatly. However, contrary to what they thought, Qin Mu hadn't consumed any medicine. Instead, he simply inhaled and exhaled as he ran, circulating the so-called Overlord Body 3 elixir technique that the village chief had taught him, the one that he didn't know was actually the most common dawing technique. Cultivating with the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique, as he ran for his life, Qin Mu made a new discovery. He realized that his vital qi became more active as he ran. The speed of its circulation became even faster as well. This was different from what he had been taught. The Overlord Body 3 elixir technique that the village chief had taught Qin Mu always required him to meditate and control his breathing. Qin Mu had learned to circulate the vital qi and nurture it, using it to condition his body. Over the course of the last 10 years of cultivation, Qin Mu had followed the village chief's instructions on cultivating the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique to the letter. Now, however, he had discovered that it was better to run while cultivating the technique. Qin Mu dashed forward as fast as possible, and the circulation of the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique became faster, nurturing and improving both his innate speed and the constitution of his body. In addition to that, wave after wave of vital qi flowed through Qin Mu's organs, limbs, bones, and even the tendons between his muscles and bones, cleansing them over and over again. Qin Mu's ruptured organs and broken bones, which he'd sustained from the devil ape's strike, recovered with each cleansing wave of vital qi. Senior brother Q and the others thought that he was relying on a high-quality medicine, yet never would they expected that was just relying on the unreliable Overlord Body 3 elixir technique. Qin Mu eventually realized that his vital qi couldn't reach a certain part of his body, the space right between his eyebrows. Between his eyebrows was space the width of a finger. Vital qi could not reach this space, although his vital qi could pass under his scalp and wash over his skull, cleansing and strengthening both of them. It would come to a stop every time it reached the center of his brow. It was as if there were an invisible wall there, blocking his vital qi from passing through. Whenever he directed his vital qi to rush the wall, something even stranger occurred. Qin Mu could hear a mysterious voice. This voice sounded as if it were coming from high in the sky, as distant as the 9 heavens above. It sounded melodious and divine, resonating like the voice of a god passing down a heavenly decree. Every time this voice resounded, Qin Mu's vital qi would retreat like an uncontrollable tide and ignore the space between his eyebrows. Could this be the spirit embryo wall? Qin Mu said inadvertently. Qin Mu was confused. Village chief and the other inhabitants of disabled elderly village had explained walls and wall breaking to him. Walls were the things sealing the treasures in warrior's body, while wall break was to break the seal and attain the treasure inside. However, they hadn't told him which part of the body the spirit embryo wall was, or how to break open the spirit embryo wall. What Qin Mu didn't know was, it wasn't that village chief and the others didn't want to tell him any of this. There actually weren't any techniques for specifically breaking through the spirit embryo wall in the entire world. A person with an ordinary human body and a person with a spirit body was on 2 intrinsically different levels. A person with a spirit body will have been born with an innately unsealed spirit embryo wall, putting them in a class above everyone else. The spirit embryo wall of an ordinary person, on the other hand, would be sealed off, relegating them to a lower class. People with spirit bodies were aloof, remote, and rarely cared about the needs of the ordinary people. Although martial practitioners still emerged from among ordinary people, village chief and the others had never heard of any of them unsealing their spirit embryo wall. As a result, they didn't know how a normal human would break through it. As vital qi rushed at the invisible wall located at the center of his eyebrows, Qin Mu continued on his frantic escape. Every time the mysterious voice rang out, his vital qi would automatically recoil from the wall. Even though he currently wasn't able to break through the wall, Qin Mu was patient and believed that he would succeed eventually. Qin Mu didn't plan on revealing this discovery regarding the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique to the elderly of the village. He decided that he would surprise them after succeeding in breaking through the spirit embryo wall. It was just hard to tell whether it would be more of a surprise to them or more of a shock. As senior brother Q and the 4 other youths continued to chase Qin Mu, they grew progressively more worried. The little devil ahead of them hadn't just recovered from his injuries, his speed had increased even more. Now that was terrifying. It meant that even as Qin Mu ran for his life, his cultivation was also improving. Although his increase in speed was slow and gradual, it was still terrifying. Cultivating had a set of rules that anyone and everyone needed to follow. Even when one succeeded in breaking through, any progress in their cultivation needed to occur slowly, over time, not all at once. Everyone had to cultivate for several days or even months, just to bring about the smallest improvement in their cultivation. In spite of these universal rules, they could clearly feel the cultivation of this little devil constantly getting stronger. It terrified them. Luckily, Qin Mu was originally inferior to the 5 youths. Even though his cultivation was currently improving, there was still a gap between them and him. However, catching up to him would be no easy feat for them. Since he had suffered at the hands of the devil ape, Qin Mu had become much more careful and would make sure to avoid the territories of the strange beasts. Whenever Apothecary brought Qin Mu out to gather herbs, he would tell him that strange beasts were very intelligent, that each of them had their own territory and would leave signs to indicate that. Those signs would include things like a tree stripped of its bark, bones buried in the ground, beast skulls on wooden stakes, or traces of urine. As long as one saw such signs, they would be able to just avoid the beasts. When Qin Mu had encountered the devil ape, there had been a mark of a gargantuan fist indicating the area was its territory. Qin Mu had accidentally rushed into its territory because he had missed that sign. Since he was now being more careful, he wouldn't make the same mistake. However, even he didn't accidentally trespass on a strange beast territory. Many would still venture out of them to search for food, filling the great ruins with danger. Qin Mu eventually found his way to a swamp where he saw 2 strange beasts having a territorial dispute. The beasts battling each other were a cockscomb, snake-necked snow condor, and a poisonous swamp dragon python. The former created gale winds with a sweep of its wings, its huge body soaring through the air. The latter writhed through the swamp below, causing havoc and destruction with its long body. Before Qin Mu could even enter the swamp, the hurricane of force caused by the 2 giant creatures swept him away. Upon landing, he came face to face with a herd of startled bison that almost trampled him to death. I keep getting farther and farther from the village. The realization made Qin Mu's heart sink. The 5 people behind him were still chasing relentlessly, making it impossible for him to return to the village. However, even more frightening than that was the fact that the sun would be setting soon. Qin Mu and Granny C had left the village right after noon. Now that the sun would start to set, darkness would soon fall. If he couldn't make it back to the village before that happened, he would face great danger. The sky's getting dark, Senior Brother Ku. In the distance behind Qin Mu, Senior Brother Ku and his companions had also noticed the setting sun. The youth that Qin Mu had kicked away wore an uneasy expression. Master said that the great ruins were cursed, that they would become a forbidden region when the sky went dark. We need to get back to the village, which has the protection of the stone statues. Otherwise, the only path left is death. Senior Brother Ku shook his head. It's too late to turn back now. As far as we've gone, we won't be able to return to village before nightfall. The darkness is as dangerous to the devil brat as it is to us. We have no choice but to see where the little devil's going to hide. Granny once said that if I got lost in the great ruins and couldn't return to the village, I shouldn't panic. Qin Mu thought to himself calmly. There are many remnants of civilization in the great ruins. If I can find one to hide in, I might be able to survive. 2 conditions need to be met for a remnant to be considered safe. First, it has to have stone statues similar to the ones in the village. Second, I need to check if there are a large amount of strange beasts in the remnant. Most are intelligent, so they'd know where to go to escape the darkness. Many remnants of civilization existed in the great ruins. Qin Mu had passed by traces of abandoned cities and villages earlier on. Considering their crumbling fences and dilapidated walls, they were extremely ancient. However, he hadn't had time to stop and check if they had stone statues. All of a sudden, the entire world went eerily silent, so quiet that it could drive a person insane. The setting sun had already reached the horizon, only half of it visible. Immediately after silence fell upon the great ruins, the beating of wings could be heard. Looking up, Qin Mu saw a huge flock of giant birds flying overhead, forming a dense cluster in the sky. Then the ground began to tremble, and the forest around him began to fall apart. One by one, strange beasts split the earth, emerging from tunnels they had been digging, and began to scramble frantically. Qin Mu even heard water erupt from the swamp, looking over to see a few scarlet fish several yards in length leaping from the water's surface, and using their fins to flee on land as if they were legs. The sight confused Qin Mu. Were fish still considered fish if they could sprint on land? All of these strange beasts are heading the same direction. I'll definitely be able to hide from the darkness there. Spirits high, Qin Mu dashed alongside the beasts. As the sky grew dimmer and dimmer, the darkness in the distance came swarming in like a tidal wave. That darkness was nothing like a simple transition between day and night. It resembled a huge flood, engulfing every mountain, valley, and all of the wilderness it came across. Even though it wasn't his first time seeing the darkness overtake the land, Qin Mu still considered it an extremely stunning sight. The darkness flooded towards Qin Mu and the herd of strange beasts like a torrential downpour. Yet all of the animals continued to furiously charge in its direction. Qin Mu hesitated for a moment. Was there really a safe place ahead in which he could take shelter from the darkness? Wouldn't he suffer a tragic end if that weren't the case? The darkness is fast approaching. Even if I turned back now, I wouldn't be able to make it to the village. I'd never be able to outrun the darkness. Gritting his teeth, he desperately rushed forward. No use worrying. I can only continue running with the beasts. 3 miles down the river that ran by disabled elderly village, the battle between Granny Sai and the Lee River's 5 elders had reached a breaking point. Originally, only 4 elders had been attacking Granny Sai. However, since they hadn't been able to promptly take her down, the 5th elder, who had been watching the battle from the cliff, Qi Yanbing, joined the fray. Adding him to their onslaught, they set up their 5 elements devil-purifying trigram. Up to this point, Granny C had only been able to just barely fend off the attacks of the 4 elders. However, her strength surprisingly increased when Qi Yanbing added to their efforts. Even their 5-element, devil-purifying trigram could not trap this old woman. This realization startled the 5 elders, and they soon grew frustrated. Only now did they figure out that this old woman wanted to take care of them all at once. To that end, she had pretended to be weak, intent on luring Qi Yanbing into the battle and prevent him from escaping. Light on her feet, Granny C flickered through the area like a phantom. The silver needles from her basket moved as if they had minds of their own, instantly covering the Li River's 5 elders in wounds. Threads that had been attached to the needles were now running through the 5 elders, binding their souls and bodies and preventing them from moving. Granny C walked towards them, scissors in hand and a bright smile on her face. Granny Me hasn't treated human skin for a long time. I wonder if my skills have gotten rusty. As soon as she came to stand in front of Qi Yanbing, he suddenly opened his mouth. A silver pellet shot from his mouth and streaked towards Granny C's face. The moment the silver pellet came into contact with the air, it grew in size. The pellet instantly became 100 times larger, expanding into a sphere made of 10,000 pure sword lights. This sudden change caught Granny Sai off guard, and she immediately moved backward in retreat. Her body went bizarrely limp, and like an earthworm squirming through the air, she dodged the sword lights. At the same time, she threw out the scissors in her hand. Like 2 silver dragons, the scissors flashed through the air, cutting and snipping at the sword lights. As nimble as she was, Granny C had still been caught off guard. One of the myriad sword lights had managed to strike her from behind, and since she was a hunchback, the sword light had essentially found her blind spot. Soon enough, the sword lights that had filled the sky vanished as pieces of broken swords came crashing to the ground, covering several acres of the area. The silver pellet that the sword lights came from returned to its original diminutive size and fell to the ground with a crack. Granny C returned to the ground as well, pulling the sword out of her back with a frown. "You still dodged it," croaked Qi Yanbi, the leader of the 5 elders. Despair filled his face as he cried. 6,842 swords were hidden inside that silver pellet. Yet, at such a close range, you still managed to dodge them. You definitely aren't an ordinary figure among the devils, but an old woman like you has never been seen among their number. Just who are you? The second he asked that question, he noticed something strange about Granny C's back. Although her hunchback did have a wound that the sword caused, there wasn't any blood flowing from it. Instead, light shined on it, revealing that the inside was hollow. This isn't your true appearance. The realization made Qi Yanbing's hair stand on end. You're wearing someone else's skin. You tore my skin. Granny C frowned. The voice that came from her mouth didn't sound like that of an old woman. Instead, it sounded soft and sweet. Whoever heard that voice would think that its owner was a gorgeous lady in her prime, not someone with 1 foot in the grave. "Ah, the air is leaking," Granny Sai muttered, sighing as she pressed a hand to her throat. Taking out a needle and thread from her basket, she sewed the tear on her back and tested out her voice, which then returned to normal. But the strange voice had long since provoked a drastic change in Qi Yanbing. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. "I've heard that voice before," he said, trembling. "I know who you are. You're that woman, the heavenly devil cult, Miss..." As Qi Yanbing spoke, Granny C's expression changed slightly. She tugged at the thread binding all of them together, and right before he could finish his sentence, the Li River's 5 elders were sliced to pieces. Their gory remains fell to the ground with a wet thud. Surprisingly enough, the thread wasn't stained with blood after that. Then, as if it were alive, it coiled back into a ball and returned to the basket on its own. Granny Sai snorted in derision, then chuckled to herself. "How long have you been there, you damned cripple?" A short distance behind her, Cripple hobbled over, using his crutch for support, a wide grin on his face. "I only just got here, dear sister. I didn't see or hear anything." Granny C glanced at him, then gave him a bright smile. "As long as you didn't hear anything, seeing is fine. Let us return to the village." Instead of immediately agreeing, Cripple hesitated. For his entire life, Sectmaster Li Tianxing of the Heavenly Devil Cult was revered as wise and powerful. In spite of that, in his later years, he made a stupid, pitiable mistake. He suddenly fancied one of the prettiest demonesses of the younger generation. He disposed of his original wife and took the young demoness as his new one. Throwing the Heavenly Devil Cult into an uproar, Cripple said, calmly reciting the story from memory. However, during their first night as husband and wife, just as they were about to consummate their marriage, Li Tianxing's new wife assassinated him and stole the Heavenly Devil Cult's Devil Bible. Every single elder of the Heavenly Devil Cult came out of closed cultivation to pursue her, yet she still managed to escape. "Such a thing happened?" Granny Sai asked innocently. Even now, no sign of her has been found, Cripple replied. Well, in the good old days, this old woman heard tell of a man who had trained his legs to a godly level. He reached a point where people referred to his legs as divine legs. Nobody in the world could match his speed, Granny C said with a laugh. However, that man realized he could use his godly speed to steal. The act excited him, and he grew addicted to it, eventually making a name for himself as the world's greatest thief god who could never be caught. Since he wasn't a god, his title, which had God in it, angered those who were. As if it were decreed by the gods when the man went to Eternal Peace Empire to steal the disc of the Emperor, he was discovered by the Imperial Preceptor. Although he lost a leg in the ensuing battle, the man still managed to escape from the Imperial Preceptor, taking the disc of the Emperor and disappearing without a trace. Despite his reputation as #1 man below the gods, the Imperial Preceptor wasn't able to catch the thief god. In fact, he probably still has one of the thief god's divine legs and is still waiting to return it to its rightful owner. Granny Sai stared at Cripple thoughtfully, and the two shared a laugh. Granny, we're all disabled people from the same village, Cripple said, his grin growing wider and wider. We have our own secrets and made a promise to not ask about another person's history. From now on, I am also deaf and mute, he swore. I won't say a word. Granny C snorted once more, then started walking toward the village, basket in tow. Did Moore tell you what happened and ask you to come for me? Cripple shook his head. You and those 5 old men caused such a commotion. All of us could sense residual waves of your battle from the village, so the village chief sent me to check on you. The expression on Granny C's face changed, and she anxiously asked, Has Moore returned to the village? I didn't see him on the way here. This is bad. The two of them rushed back to disabled elderly village, and even before they got there, the sun finished setting as darkness rose on the horizon. It climbed higher and higher into the sky, spreading across the horizon and enveloping everything in its path like a raging tidal wave. Granny Sai ran through the village, searching high and low for Qin Mu. Moore isn't back yet? She asked frantically. Then the darkness engulfed disabled elderly village. There's no need to worry, Granny. Sitting on a stretcher that Cripple and Apothecary were carrying out, Village Chief stopped Granny Sai from taking a stone statue to look for Qin Mu. In a reassuring voice, he said, We've taught him everything he needs to know. As long as he had learned them, Qin Mu should be able to survive in the Great Ruins. The sky has already gone dark, so it's pointless for you to go out now. The village chief's words devastated Granny Sai, but she knew he was telling the truth. The darkness had already overwhelmed the Great Ruins. As long as Qin Mu was still alive, he wouldn't need her to save him. He'd be able to survive the night. If he were dead, then there would be no point in her carrying the stone statue outside to find him. He still has that jade pendant with him, Granny C thought to herself. However, even though the pendant on Qin Mu's chest came to mind, she knew that it had a limited range of protection meant for protecting a small baby. Since Qin Mu had grown up, the jade pendant's protective glow was only large enough to cover his chest. Be smart, Muir, Granny C muttered. You'll definitely survive. That wraps up the content for today's episode. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel to get notifications for the next episode. For now, goodbye, and see you next time.